Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Josh. Thank you so much for checking us out. If you're interested in ways to save money and save the planet, then click that subscribe button and check out other content, including the two videos that preceded this one that focuses specifically on a green car buyer's guide, as well as a more extensive overview of the environmental implications and life cycle analysis of lithium-ion batteries for vehicles. So today's video is something different. It's really a practical tool or a spreadsheet that I will also provide for you to download that will allow you to very systematically figure out in your own real-world scenario whether a new vehicle is going to be green and whether it's going to save you money. And I'll walk you through that in just a second. Now, before you do, you may have already gone on to the EPA's website and checked out a few of their tools because they are quite helpful. And some of those I've incorporated into my own studies. The first is the PHEV calculator tool. Now this tool is really helpful. It allows you to select a plug-in vehicle and type in some driving parameters. You can do a basic or more focused analysis. And it gives you a rough overview of what your expenses will be and how much you're going to pay in electricity and gas and things like that. You can also just look at the general car comparisons where they will compare your miles per gallon as well as estimate your money savings over the course of several years to figure out your kind of true life scenario. And there are other websites, of course, there are Edmunds and Kelley Blue Book that will look at kind of your real world cost of ownership estimates, and all those are incredibly helpful. But one thing that I could not find was a way to really estimate the carbon footprint of these vehicles in the way that is specific, not overly simplified, and applicable to real-world driving scenarios. And for that reason, I developed this spreadsheet just for you. So before we get into the spreadsheet itself, I want to look at one more thing, and that's the power profiler from the EPA. You have to look past the EPA rating of 0 grams per mile of CO2 tailpipe emissions and actually look at the energy to power the car, which is what you're going to be using every day. And that, of course, is not zero. So if you look at the power profiler, it gives you a nice comparison here of all the different subregions and where the carbon, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen output is for each respective area. And this, of course, is based on the mix of all these different geographic subregions of gas, coal, nuclear, hydro, etc. Now, if you type in your actual zip code, then you can see specifically for your area a little bit more detailed information. And if you go one step further and look at the Excel spreadsheet, when you pull this up, what happens is you're brought right to the introduction page. If you go to the data entry tab and you click this zip code, let's say we type in a zip code in Jacksonville, and you need to type in a kilowatt hours that's appropriate. So you can type in whatever you want. Let's say we type in 1,000. That's a good estimate for monthly energy use. And it gives you a real sense of what your carbon footprint is based on your own power use. So what I did is I added a new tab, and that's right down here. That's this vehicle calculations tab. And if you open that, then what you're taken to is the Saving Green Automotive Carbon Cost Calculator. And this is, I think, a very helpful tool that will help you decide what vehicle is best for you. And I'll walk you through how this actually works. So the first thing, of course, the cost of your fuel is going to be critical. So look at your local gasoline prices, your diesel prices, the local electricity rate, which you will find on your electricity bill in terms of dollars per kilowatt. In our case, it's about 12 or 13 cents. And then you want to look at your driving parameters. In this case, I divided it between a daily commute and then a long haul trip. So in my case, I put in 35 miles as a good average commute. I put in 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. And of those 35 miles, 12 of which are on the city, the remainder, 23, is on the highway. Now, any solid orange box, you type in the data directly. Any data point is a calculation tab that the spreadsheet will automatically populate. For example, if I brought this down to 10 miles, then you can see that the highway changes to 25. And the total miles of commute driving is automatically brought up here at 8750 in this scenario. If I brought this up to 6 days a week, same thing. It'll jump up to 10,500. Then I look at long trips. Let's say that we do 500-mile trips and we take 3 of those a year, of which 50 of those are city mileage and 450 are highway. Well, that's 1,500 miles total for trips. That gives our average total of 12,000 miles a year. And again, that's automatically calculated. Now, the reason why I break up city and highway is because different vehicles have different efficiencies. Plug-ins and battery vehicles are more efficient in city driving due to the stop-and-go kinetic energy, and gasoline vehicles are more efficient on the highway. So once you get your commute and your local statistics down, then you want to look at these general variables. These are the assumptions that I've automatically populated that you can leave alone or you can change based on your specific region. Now, one of those, this yellow tab, is automatically populated from the data entry tab, and that's based on your local zip code. In this case, it's 0.936 pounds of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And that converts to 0.426 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour, assuming a 2.2 pound per kilogram conversion. Now, where is this data coming from? Well, if I go back to the entry tab, it comes from this data here. And you can see here that this is based on 1,000 kilowatt hours pumping out 936 pounds of CO2 equivalent. Now, what's a CO2 equivalent? The CO2 equivalent is a common metric that understands that different compounds and chemicals, when introduced in the air, have different global warming or energy storing effects. For example, methane is significantly more effective at storing energy than carbon dioxide. And all of these things can be referenced here if you're curious to learn more about that. No matter what is put in this yellow box here for the kilowatt hours, let's say I change this to 45. Doesn't change this value because it divides out the number of CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour that are entered. So this is per kilowatt hour as a single unit. So the other things to note are the amount of carbon required to make a vehicle. In this case, I averaged about 5 tons. The carbon cost of each kilowatt hour of battery production, and in previous videos, again, I will reference that down below, I went into the life cycle analysis of different studies that settled on 175 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour of battery size. Now, solar, again, I'll reference this down below, but there was a study that basically found that over the course of a solar panel installation, the cost per kilowatt hour of energy produced is about 6 grams, so very efficient. These two values for gasoline and diesel in terms of carbon output per gallon were provided by the EPA. The MPGe factor, this is basically a very complicated formula that if you look at Wikipedia or other references, it kind of goes through how the metric was devised. I didn't go through that analysis for this, but this is just for reference, that it associates that there's about 33.7 kilowatt hours of energy per gallon of gasoline. Battery degradation, I factored in about 1% degradation per year for the battery, and then gasoline maintenance at about $1,000 a year. If you look at AAA averages, it may be a little bit higher, maybe 1,100 or so, but I just thought this was a good estimated value. And again, all of these are editable. You can go up or down on these values based on your own personal preferences. I also put a tab here for charging efficiency, and this is due to energy losses of charging any battery. So because of the AC to DC conversion, you lose about 10 to 20% of efficiency. And it's a little bit more efficient if you use a fast charger, like a 220 volt charger versus a typical 110. I will reference some articles and papers that kind of go into this in greater detail, but I think about a 12% efficiency loss is appropriate. And again, based on these numbers, you can go up or down to see how that affects things. And then I filled out some of these values here for tailpipe emissions. This is found directly on the window sticker. So basically you just look at what that is and you can put that in there as a reference, but it really doesn't impact our calculations at all. It's just for your own curiosity. So now let's get into the different vehicles that we actually analyzed in this spreadsheet. The first is the Toyota Prius Prime. The second is the Honda Clarity Touring plug-in. The third is the Hyundai Sonata SEL. That's a hybrid. Fourth is the Tesla Model 3. This is the rear-wheel drive plus model. The Toyota RAV4 XLE, gasoline-powered car. And the sixth is the Ford F-150 diesel. You can plug in any vehicles that you want as long as you understand how to enter the data in and keep it consistent between the vehicle type. So the first two rows are for plug-ins only, then the hybrid, then a battery vehicle, then any gasoline vehicle or any diesel vehicle. As long as you keep those 6 criteria, you can plug in any vehicle that fits into those parameters. So the MSRP is just listed off Kelley Blue Book. I just took the median value, and the average cost for all these vehicles is about $32,000. Anything in the red tends to be worse or more expensive. Anything greener tends to be better, so you can see as a comparison. And these are federal rebates. Now there may be state incentives as well, and you can add these in. Whatever you plug in here, this is the sum of all the rebates that you'll be able to get. This is based on the battery size of the vehicle or other conditions specific to your car. Now for the Tesla, there is no rebate anymore because they've already produced enough vehicles, so those have sunset. But for the Honda Clarity and the Prius Prime, they still offer incentives. Battery kilowatt hours is available for reference, so you can look this up, but it's 8.8 for the plug-in, it's 1.62 for the Sonata, very small hybrid battery, 54 kilowatt hours approximately, give or take, for the Tesla, etc. All electric range is critical as well, because this will determine really the overall transition between electric and gas based on your driving habits. If you can get your whole commute in 25 miles or less, then the Prius Prime would be fine. If you can't, then you may need to get something with longer range, and I'll go through the math just to prove that to you. Then your total range is going to be a sum of gas and electric, and that's listed here. Most of these are estimates. And your miles per gallon city and highway, and the Tesla doesn't provide that explicitly, but basically, in order to reference an electric vehicle, you want to look at miles per kilowatt hour. So the kilowatt hours per 100 miles is actually provided directly from the EPA, also on the window sticker in the little efficiency tab. And if you plug that in to these orange boxes, it will automatically convert what the miles per kilowatt hour is, which I think is more analogous to a miles per gallon. So once you've plugged all this information into these orange boxes, this basically will give you more explicit information that you can explore to give you more insight into how these vehicles actually perform in your driving situation. For example, for a 35-mile commute, I'm only able to get 71% of that achieved on battery alone through the Prius Prime, whereas because it's less than the 47 rated electric miles on the Clarity, I can actually get more on the Clarity all electric than I could on the Prime. Now the balance of that is automatically calculated in terms of what we're getting from the internal combustion engine or the ICE. Now for longer trips, both the plugins are going to be very ineffective in terms of what the battery is going to be able to do. Most of it, as you can see here, 95-91% is going to be calculated by your efficiencies. So I'm just kind of exploring that all these formulas here are pre-populated, so please don't manipulate these if you download that. Just enter the information in these orange boxes up here. So if we make some adjustments, you can see that those values will change. Like for example, let's say instead of 35 miles, I now have a 68-mile commute. Well, now I'm only getting 37% on the Prius Prime, 69% on the Honda Clarity, and all the other numbers, of course, will change. But let's go back to 35. This will give you how many all-electric miles per year, how many gas miles per year, and then the dollars you're going to spend on electricity driving those all-electric miles versus the dollars you're going to spend filling up your gas tank. And then how much daily, how much for your trips, how much you're going to spend on your trip gas, total dollars for a trip, just like total dollars daily, which is your commute equivalent, and then your dollars per year. This is really the fuel cost of running your vehicle based on your utility rates and the price of gasoline. As those values go up or down, so will this. The next tab is your carbon footprint, and this is based on a few important key factors. Number one, the size of your battery. This is critical, and we talked about this extensively in the other video. The larger the battery, the more carbon cost to produce the vehicle overall, and that's based on this value here on the first column. You can see how much bigger the Tesla is compared to all the others. Your upfront kilogram is going to be basically your 5 tons plus the tonnage of the battery, and that's summed here. You can see that the two gas and diesel vehicles are only at 5,000. You can adjust all these variables. Now we look at kilograms of CO2 times the amount of kilowatt hours. In other words, how much carbon are you producing from powering your vehicle's battery alone? And this is based on the product of a few of these factors here, based on the size of your battery, based on the amount of all-electric miles that you're putting in. You can see miles per year. You can see miles per kilowatt hour. You can see the efficiency loss and the kilograms of carbon that you're actually using per kilowatt hour. All those factors are important to calculate this value. Now for kilograms of carbon and gasoline, pretty straightforward. It's just basically multiplying the number of gas miles per year times the carbon output per gallon of gasoline, factoring in your mileage efficiency. Then it's again breaks it down between the commute and the trip to get your total annual kilograms of carbon per year. And that's across all the vehicles listed. So now we look at our annual carbon footprint. And this is going to be at year 0, how much carbon was already put in to manufacturing that vehicle. Now at year 1, we're going to add in our annual rates of carbon here and just add that year over year. And this gives you a 10-year total in terms of metric tons of the carbon footprint realistically of the vehicle. Now let's look at annual cost. Now, annual cost, I assumed will increase in terms of year over year only for the battery-powered vehicles because of efficiency losses on the battery's capacity to discharge. So I included like a 1% factor in all of these. You can see here that extra 1% factored in. Is that the perfect way to do it? No, but it was the easiest way that I could estimate. So now we see the total upfront cost at year 0, which is the MSRP minus any federal rebates or incentives. And then your annual cost is added in to get you a 10-year sum. I included 2 columns, one for the fuel only and one with the 1,000 a year added for maintenance for the gasoline vehicles only because they require more maintenance with oil changes and things like that than the battery power counterparts. So with all of that factored in, now let's look at the grand summary, which is down below. And this is color coordinated to visually give you a rapid impression as what's the greenest, what's the cheapest, what's the most expensive, etc. We look at the fuel cost per year. The greenest is the Tesla. It's at just under $400 to fill this every year. The plug-in vehicles are close second and third, followed by your hybrid, and then your gasoline and diesel are last on the list. If you look, the diesel far and away is the most expensive car to operate and the most polluting, so don't get diesel. If we look at gasoline, we see that ultimately this generally falls out pretty much 5th in line for almost all situations, except for the 10-year fuel. Now, why is that? That's because the cost of the Tesla is more than the other vehicles, so the MSRP is higher. That's why this comes in at this value here. This 10-year total includes maintenance, and you can see that it basically adds $1,000 to all the gasoline vehicles, and they all come in pretty comparable, right around between $40,000 and $45,000 on average. You can see the average here about $45,000. Only the 2 gasoline vehicles are above average. Now, CO2 per year, not surprisingly, the Tesla is the greenest because the emissions from the vehicle are going to be less because it's battery only, but it's not 0. And the 10-year total, which will include everything, including vehicle manufacturing, gives you, in order, the plug-in Prius Prime as the greenest, followed by the Clarity, followed by the Hyundai Sonata Hybrid, followed by the Tesla Model 3, followed by the RAV4, and lastly the F-150. So just a complete coincidence these happen to go perfectly in this rainbow order. So that's with these parameters here, but what happens if we tweak them and play with them a little bit? Well, first of all, let's go back up to a much longer commute. Let's say that instead of going 35 miles a day, let's say we have to go 85 miles a day. Now the plugins are not going to be as green because more of it's going to require gasoline. So now what happens? Well, if we have to go beyond the range of the commute, then we see that in fact the Tesla now is the greenest option. Good to know. Let's say that there are efficiency improvements in how the batteries are made. For example, the Tesla Gigafactory is supposed to be net zero. So instead of 175 kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour, maybe it's much less. Let's say it's 30. Well, if we drop it down by that much, now we see that once again, the Tesla is much more competitive. In fact, it's the greenest option if battery efficiency improves. Now let's say that we live in an area that's a little bit greener than where we live in Florida. Let's say we chose a different geographical area with less carbon output, like somewhere in Massachusetts in the Northeast. Well, now if we go back to the vehicle calculations, now we see that our total amount of carbon and kilograms of CO2 is about half of what it used to be. And we see that once again, more or less the same order, but we see that now these 2 plugins are much greener and the Tesla's even greener still, but the plug-in is still the greener option. Now let's say that we buy the Model Y, which has a 70 kilowatt hour battery and not the 54. If we bump that up to 70, now what happens? Now we see that the Tesla is much less efficient just simply based on the battery size alone. Let's say that you put solar panels on your roof. You're now producing only 6 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour, which is 0.006 kilograms. So, according to these instructions here, in this cell, B22, if we make this now 0.006, now what happens? Now we're powering all of our battery vehicles with solar energy alone, and we're completely separate from the grid. What happens now? Well, now look at that. The Honda Clarity steps into the lead. Why? Because it requires a small battery, and in this situation at 35 miles a day, I'm able to go completely on battery alone, for my daily commute, which is the vast majority of my driving in this situation. So in that case, it's the greenest option. So you can see that based on all of these different parameters and permutations, everything is going to fluctuate. Let's say that the diesel, instead of being 22 and 33, let's say that we have a very efficient diesel car that gets 45 and 50 miles per gallon. Well, how does that change things? Well, certainly that's going to make the diesel significantly more efficient. Now it's more efficient than the typical gasoline vehicle. So all of these things play a role, and how they impact things is going to depend on your driving situation. And that's why I made this spreadsheet, because it really depends on real-world output and where your geographic power is coming from. But the general take-home is that the plug-in hybrid vehicles are going to be your greenest options for most people. They require smaller batteries, and as long as you can get through your daily commute on battery alone, that's really the way to go. What's also interesting is that based on the carbon cost of battery manufacturing, the electric cars are actually a little bit less efficient in some situations than even your standard hybrid, not to mention your plug-in. So keep in mind your battery size and try to inquire more about the carbon cost of your specific vehicles. Not surprisingly, your gasoline and diesel are going to be your two dirtiest options, and based on maintenance costs, they actually come out to be fairly expensive too. So it's going to be cheaper if you go with a greener car. And then lastly, solar does make a huge difference. If you actually go with solar or another renewable resource with a much smaller carbon footprint, then your car itself will also be much greener. So I hope that this was helpful. Please feel free to download this document and enter data on vehicles that you may be interested in purchasing or just want to learn more about, and see if you feel like these numbers make sense. And if you have any questions or critiques, please let me know in the comments. Please consider subscribing to help this channel grow. And once again, I really appreciate your time. Good luck out there saving green. My name is Josh. I'll see you next time.